snap reaction. Let's hear from Tony Shaw as to what he thought about this match.
Well, you came here and we all picked Port Adelaide to win, Matty. We thought maybe we're going to get a contest because of what happened last week from Essendon. But, this game was over at half-time. 49-point lead it was to Port Adelaide. They were cleaner. They defended better. Their key forwards, they forced the kick down the line. And then on the rebound, they just controlled the ball a lot better than Essendon. Look, Essendon, we can say what we want to say about youth. We can say but I thought a lot of their senior players aren't showing enough, as in leadership that it hurts enough, and that's only 2 rounds into the game. And I might be wrong, but you look at it and you think, if you don't defend the senior players, the young kids don't. They're learning bad lessons, and it was the youngsters today who I thought were fantastic. El Achar, is that how you say it?
Ashkar, yeah.
El Achar. Well, he, to me, showed little things that were good. Kako was, got involved. Newen, I thought, was okay. So, Johnson, they're the ones, that's the future. And, but, gee, where do they go from here? You lose Redmond, he probably won't be back for a fair while. You're thinking with that. Young Sharp went down with we think, cramp and bag cramp, but maybe an ankle injury involved with that too. Where do you go? And I'd love to hear from Essendon supporters. I've always thought they've had a little bit more talent than what they are showing as getting something from it. And it's not totally about the coach in one way, but what is it? What do they stand for? And I don't think many Essendon supporters would know what they stand for. The clubs do certain things. They set a standard, but I don't know where the standard is at Essendon at the moment. The coach cannot be happy with what's happened in the first 2 weeks.
At the end of the day, they're easy to play against, aren't they?
Oh, yes. And that was identified by one of their best players ever in Matty Lloyd during the week about defensively. And everybody, there's a lot of team defence, but at times in a game, you'll have to have the time where you haven't got the ball, you have an opponent. Now, normally, you can zone off and things like that, but you've got to know, they're going. And to see them run through, Port Adelaide midfielders run through, forward 50 and set up goals or kick goals themselves or whatever with so much ease, that you don't hurt enough. You're not switched on enough. So whether it's thought process, whether the training of trying to get it as a team defence, it isn't working, and it's killing them in offense because by the time every time you try and relate to attacking, the best way to defend is to get it deep in your forward line and hold it in. Well, it's coming out like anything, And the only, we said Kako and Nate Caddy were bonuses today. A lot of them were, late in the game where they got 3 or 4, which, the queue was in the rack, but. Yeah, I don't know. If Essendon supporters, I'd love to hear from what you're thinking. If I've got it wrong, but I see some signs which have stood out. What happened last week, exactly the same this week.
I think, as you said, though, earlier, what is the expectation of Essendon fans going into the season? But it does hurt. I reckon it hurts earlier in the year. As Richo said, you have hope.
Yeah.
Hope springs eternal. When a new season starts, you think, okay, will it be a little bit different? And you get smashed in week 1 and you get smashed in week 2, and all that hope just dissipates. Yeah, you're hoping that hope dissipates mid-year. It dissipates after a couple of games. Yeah.
When we looked at their next 5 games, I'm thinking they're a chance of maybe, in this form, you're no chance in the next 5 games because 4 of them are pretty tough, as in sides, going okay and season side. So, that becomes an issue in itself. But I think the manner of how it's happening is more important than the margin at times. The margin, the manner leads to the margin. So maybe they've just got to look and say, is it that they push numbers back now instead of, I don't know. I don't know whether they've got a forward line. Caddy does it. Does he defend? He probably doesn't defend much because he's a good player and he can get the ball himself. But, 2 metre Peter, does he do it enough? Langford, does he defend well enough for you to be a chance? Or are we go over and throw everything out, throw the bathwater, out and say, okay, is the ball coming in bad enough that the opposition read it so well and then, bang, you can't defend it? these are the issues that every coach looks at and every team will look at.
If you talk about expectations, they play North Melbourne next Saturday night at Marble Stadium. So you would say they are in Essendon's weight division. If you go by weight divisions, you go North Melbourne. They should be expecting a win there again. And North Melbourne had a good first-up win. They're about to play the West Coast Eagles. But the Bombers should go into that game thinking...
Well, a confident 50-50, we're a chance. Yeah, I'm with you on
we're
that
in the
one.
contest. We should, you know, they probably won't start...
Like, if North would have beat them by 60 points, what are you saying then? You know, if it was to get there, something is terribly wrong. But I'm with you. It's a 50-50 contest, you're thinking, where you believe they'll be at the end of the year.
Peter Wright, well, that's a good point, John. Let's talk about that. We've talked about how good Caddy was, but let's talk about Peter Wright today and maybe a few of his numbers for Lamar.
Yeah, Peter Wright, 11 possessions, no tackles, didn't hit the scoreboard, and I'm trying to find out whether he took a mark or not, and I can't know. So...
Pretty quiet day.
Pretty quiet day. I said it. I think Caddy and whoever else play, even Langford, I would rather Peter Wright not be near me. He did compete twice in I think it was the third quarter and brought the ball to ground, and they got goals out of that. But you want more. You need more. You know, he's got to be a goal kicker. He's got to be a mark taker. I think I'd use him off the bench, to back up Blackiston in the ruck, because I think he likes to get that freedom. He's disappointing, and his career's been fairly disappointing too. Over the right for the size of the man and what you're hoping can happen.
Just give us a word on Port Adelaide. What do you think of the Power today?
Well, they had to get it done, didn't they? They were so disappointing last week. The way that they started, 6-5. The game. Look, matter of fact, the game was nearly over a quarter time. I was going to ask the lady to come in then, as a matter of fact, to our producers behind the scenes. That was pretty early. But, what was it, 32 points at quarter time. Half time was done and dusted. All they had to do was to make Essendon worry about what they were doing out there and, just get to the point where they say, okay, let's set this game, let's get it done early. And they did that, and they did it well. A lot of good signs with some of the younger players too. Whitlock, I thought, showed a bit for a bloke who's 200 centimetres. He's going to have something to do for the Georgiades coming back in. He's a class act, and he's a player who I think he can take you a long way. Marshall in his new role did it okay, but they weren't under a lot of pressure today. Lukosius is important because I think at times he doesn't look like he's a really good competitor, but he's kicked, he kicked 3 goals. His foot skills, if he gets it 15 times, you're going to hurt somewhere, and that's what he does for you. But no, they just spread the load. Willem Drew, we spoke about him, just a really strong character in the midfield who you look at. Rosie's the big one. What's going on there. Let's hopefully that he's not out for a long time and they can get around it.
A bit of a bizarre one, wasn't it?
Sorry?
Nerve damage.
Nerve damage, yeah. Like there's no doubt that he extended that knee out, and whether sometimes you can have a bone, like a bone can hit on a nerve or hit on a ligament, and it could cause that trouble. So it might have been something like that, and hopefully, like I said, we don't want to see great players out. Yeah, the 2 key defenders stood up again today too. Radagalia and Alir probably played his best for a while. He's had a lot of goals kicked on him in the last 4 or 5 games, but he's got that job done. So, no, they got it done. They did it early. They set it up early, and that's all you'd ask as a coach.